It's salary exploitation for week one, and I am back, and I just did the best opening title section I probably ever did as a DFC employee. So how about that, Jason?
Dude, I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to be potting with you again. And also the fact that, yeah, that simply was your best one. It was smooth. The We Are Here, you've grown up. You're in a suit now. I'm
Mm,
gonna assume you had the jacket suit on before you hopped
mm.
on, but yeah.
No jacket suit. I'm not that sophisticated yet. I got to get a few more paychecks before I can get one of those. But yeah. So football's back. This is a weird feeling. It's been a while. I've had to suffer through baseball season and NFL death season, which is just training camp and people getting hurt and down for the season. But we're almost there. Basically, dress rehearsal away, and we're on to week one. So, are you excited?
Dude, I'm pumped. I feel like I'm pumped more so for this year than I have been all in the past. And that's weird because my team is obviously decimated.
Okay, so you know how I've like tried to suppress all my fandom of the Rams. Well, I I feel like you understand this more than most and people that listened last season. I'm just sadly biased towards all these Rams fantasy players. And I was out. I was out this year. I was ready to be done. I was like, I'm not a fan of any team anymore. And then they traded for Sammy Watkins. And then, the biases from last year are like, well, yeah, Jared Goff was the worst quarterback in NFL history last year. And like, yeah, Todd Gurley was awful. But like, they're playing the Colts week one. So here we are.
And without Andrew Luck, without their starting center, Ryan Kelly, no Vontae Davis, who is going to miss some time with a groin injury as he usually does. So we're looking, and not to mention, Todd Gurley is very cheap, who we can talk about. He's cheap this week.
So, I mean, let's break into it. Quarterbacks here for week one. Who are you looking at for values? And I guess for week one, what are you generally planning on doing at this position?
This is an interesting one that, we talked before a little bit, and, DraftKings, it's pretty sharp. DraftKings quarterback pricing is always kind of sharp, I feel. And there's a big difference between FanDuel and DraftKings because no one, I think Matt Ryan's 8,500, but no one's above that on FanDuel this week. Aaron Rodgers, I mean, he's only 83, but we'll talk value here real quick. In DraftKings value quarterbacks, it always tends to be a strategy because, there's always numerous 5K guys, 5'4", and there's a couple already off to the season. So Brian Hoyer's won 5,100 on DraftKings. He's only 64 on FanDuel, 23 on Yahoo. Hoyer's interesting because he's an actual serviceable fantasy quarterback. He's not bad. We've played him in Houston, plenty of times when he was healthy. He's not a bad fill-in. And for these prices, I definitely don't mind him here.
And we don't like to look too deep into preseason, but if you watched any of that preseason game, that offense looked like a well-oiled machine of like really kind of like, I don't know anything about cars, but like a really terrible like group of parts to make a car, but it like is running perfectly somehow. That's what the 49ers look like this year. It's like all their players are bad other than like maybe Carlos Hyde. But man, Marquise Goodwin is fast. Brian Hoyer looks like he did with the Bears. And this team looks like it's going to be able to put up not a ton of points, but enough points. And you mentioned Hoyer. I mean, why not throw it in there, 6,400 on FanDuel as well. So another guy you can really look at there.
Yeah, and curious to see what your thoughts. I mean, my general kind of expectations of San Francisco is obviously fairly low, as everyone's is probably. But in terms of a fantasy aspect, I mean, I don't think they're going to be a team that we just kind of look and go. They're not going to be a team where we go, hey, you know what? 49ers are on the slate this week. I don't have to research their team because, like you said, I mean, Goodwin's there, Pierre Garçon's there. The tight end that's going to jump up, his name escapes me now, that they traded Vance McDonald's there. Carl's Hyde. I mean, there's going to be some serviceable guys here, and if their prices are right, as they are for week one, in Carolina's defense, I mean, do I expect a little bit of a progression from last year? Sure. but they weren't actually a team that I was afraid of just targeting.
And so Carolina, it seems like this like odd year team where they either are dominant the entire year or just get smoked. And obviously it's directly related to the health of Cam Newton. We obviously know when he's fully healthy and doing Cam Newton things, they're going to win a ton of games. But when he's hurt, he's got a shoulder injury, or he's got an ankle injury, that team just kind of sputters. Now they did a lot of things this offseason, drafting Christian McCaffrey and subtly Curtis Samuel. They have Devin Funchess in year 3, Kelvin Benjamin entering year 4, and towards the apex of his career, if he's going to have one. I think Carolina's going to roll this year and potentially surprise some people in that division, along with, the Falcons, I think, regressing a little bit. But that's kind of getting on a tangent. Back to this week 1, I see Carolina going in there and rolling them. But I think that could be good for Brian Hoyer. I think we could see a lot of garbage points in this game. And George Kittle, I think, might have been the name you were thinking of. And I mean, who knows with Kyle Shanahan, like what he's going to do. There's such limited options there. Obviously, you mentioned Pierre Garçon, but some of these guys are going to emerge in this, organized, efficient Kyle Shanahan offense. So it's only a matter of time before we kind of see the game plan here for the 49ers. It's going to be tough to figure out in week 1, but Hoyer, yeah, sure.
Yeah, and we'll talk about Carlos Hyde in a little bit, but San Francisco's always been a team that weirdly shows up week 1. The last 2 years, and do you remember playing maybe Adrian Peterson playing Todd Gurley week 1, thinking they were going to go into San Francisco, roll them, and everything was going to be so favorable, and Carlos Hyde, was outshining everyone. And now that they have, I think, an actual competent quarterback in Hoyer who – sure, maybe he can game manage some games and maybe he can air it out once they're behind. It's a little bit of a different story. And we'll kind of transition here to some other guys. I mean, Carson Wentz, 5,300 on DK. I like his weapons this year. I think Philly's offense is going to be fun for fantasy. There's some interesting pairing partners with Ertz, with Alshon Jeffrey, Deshaun Kaiser. I mean, Corey Coleman, Kenny Britt. It's not a bad offense for a team that's probably going to be trailing most of the season.
Okay, so the Deshaun Kaiser, there's just 20 minutes of material there that I could just get angry about, but I'm not going to. He's a young player with a bunch of promise, and nobody's going to take that away from him, especially at least for this year. I think next year is going to be problems, but for this year, and as you mentioned, he's got one former first-round pick and one that's freshly, of last year, the 16th pick in the draft. So he's kind of someone, Corey Coleman, I'm referring to, the man who scored 20 touchdowns in 8 games his junior year at Baylor, still possesses that elite athleticism that playerprofiler.com compared him to, Odell Beckham for a prospect comparable. I mean, that's the type of guy he could be at a ceiling. So those are the types of guys I like to take chances on early in GPPs. So I like you mentioning that there. I don't necessarily like Kaiser, but I do think you can go with Britt or Coleman there. So, yeah.
On FanDuel, it's a little bit different because the quarterbacks are really underpriced. Aaron Rodgers is 8,300, and I don't care that he's facing Seattle. He's at home. We've seen elite quarterbacks put up points against Seattle in the past. Implied total 26. He's been solid against them. I mean, 20 plus FanDuel points in the last 2 regular season games, and I just kind of look and go, a lot of these guys are underpriced on FanDuel for quarterbacks. I mean, you mentioned Carolina going into San Francisco and rolling.
Mm-hmm.
I think Cam Newton's an interesting GPP option because he is priced up. And last year he was so inconsistent where people may look and go, all we have is last year. We have 4 preseason games we have last year. He's coming off the injury, had surgery in the offseason. He's a completely volatile quarterback. But these early weeks, I mean, like you said, taking some shots on guys like Newton, where there's a lot of uncertainty with his rushing ability in the red zone. He's 1 rushing touchdown and 2 passing touchdowns away from being a top scoring quarterback for the week.
Absolutely. And I don't think as long as Cam Newton plays, they're going to get away from him in the goal line. He's certainly going to see less like direct snapped rushes like between the 20s, but goal line, he's still going to be the guy, in my opinion. I think guys like McCaffrey are going to help him in the passing game and sustain drives for longer periods. That was kind of an issue for Carolina in the past few years. So I look at this game and I say, okay, he's going to be under-owned, I think. I don't think people are really high on Cam Newton at this stage, like you mentioned, with all that stuff that happened last year. I mean, I think you could get, do you think under 10%? I mean, it's always tough to judge week one, but even at a good price, especially on DK, I don't know that he's going to be over 10%. And then if you stack him with Kelvin, I mean, that's a pretty interesting contrarian, stack.
Yeah, I was about to bring that up too. I mean, you mentioned Benjamin, and there are cheap stacking options, and I think Olsen's a guy you probably won't play a ton of this year, but he's another interesting one. But just because I think actually paying up at tight end is going to be contrarian this week. There's two popular tight ends that are super cheap that I think we'll get to here in a minute, but. Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, Russell Wilson, there's a lot of good spots, not even to mention, Derek Carr, Mariota in that game. That's a high total that's expected to be a shootout. There's a lot of options, and I think, ownership really isn't going to be a huge factor. So, yeah, I think Newton sub 10% is, it could happen.
So there's one more guy you mentioned on here that you might have to sell me on. Carson Palmer. Obviously, Bruce Arians came out and ragged on his receiver core, other than Fitz, who's just going to be awesome. What are you seeing here with Carson Palmer against Detroit?
See, I think, you mentioned, I think a lot of people are down on Arizona this year, just in general for everyone who's not named David Johnson. And, Carson Palmer, he's 6K on DraftKings. That's kind of smashed in the middle between, Newton, Rodgers, all those guys. And then, people who might as well just go, if he's going to get me 21 DK points, 17 DK points, I might as well just drop down to Wentz or someone like that. So he's going to be a contrarian play. I think Arizona's offense is going to be decent this year. There's going to be spots to avoid. I think on the road at Detroit's interesting, given the fact that they're the road team, but they're an interesting way to kind of go because, you can still stack Palmer Johnson just because of Johnson's usage in the passing game. And, they're very verbal about getting Johnson basically all the usage in the world. And like you said, I mean, outside of Fitz, there's just not a partner where I'm really completely confident in. I mean, John Brown's had the injury issues. JJ Nelson's a guy who, he's a home run threat, but I don't see him as anything more than that.
He's literally 150 pounds. I mean, there's a lot of talk about how well he played last year, but NFL coaches, there's only so much of a role. Like, there's only so much of a target share you can give a guy that's 150 pounds. Like, he's going to die, if you know what I mean. So I actually do. You know what? That's an interesting contrarian play. I like it. So let's move on to running backs. And the three you mentioned here make me want to throw up. Like, I'm not going to lie, like the names, just the names themselves, not the matchups or the team, just the pain Darren McFadden has dragged me throughout his career. Jaquiz Rodgers just being just lacking any NFL running back skills and still being thrown in there. And Carlos Hyde just suffering those injuries as soon as he gives you a moment of excitement. So I kind of broke it down. Who's your favorite one of that group?
Definitely Carlos Hyde. I think he's obviously the most talented out of those three. And he's in a decent matchup against, the Panthers, who, like I said last year, they were just kind of lackluster here and there against both the run and the pass. And Hyde, he's kind of another one who's had uncertainty. We've seen talks coming out of Roto World where they don't know what's going to happen with him. They've had a couple of guys behind him that could push him even off the roster. We saw it get that far, but I just don't see that happening to the point where week one, I expect him to get a lot of goal line touches. I expect the San Francisco team to be able to move the ball somewhat more than last year, and that's obviously a big benefit to Hyde. So, he works well in the passing game. I love him on DraftKings this week, only 4,600. Like, that's just such a nice price tag for him, and he's Rodgers is 300 more, McFadden 61. DK did a really nice job pricing him up to the point where I'm probably not even going to use him. I don't think I'm going to touch McFadden actually at all this week.
Really? Because I understand the Giants, but that FanDuel price is probably why you put him on here, right?
Yeah, and that's what we'll talk about here. We'll kind of go because McFadden, I mean, 61 on DK, he's more expensive than Gurley. I rather use Gurley over him. I rather use some other options. But yeah, 58 on FanDuel. I understand the appeal just because the attempts are going to be there. But the Giants are a good defense. I mean, I think they're going to be a top 5 defense this year. Obviously, you and I praised them a lot against the pass last year just because of their secondary, but against the run too. I mean, this is going to be a game where I don't know how much exposure I want to it on both sides because I don't think it's going to be that high scoring. And Dallas's offensive line, when McFadden had that strong year behind it, it's not really that same line. They're a little bit banged up. So I think it's an iffy one, and I kind of rather stay away from it and go some other directions.
Fair. I do think McFadden is basically, these weeks without Zeke. Obviously, we've heard the last few days of potentially something going on and that getting, stopped early on in the year. If that happens, we'll obviously adjust. But going forward, believing McFadden has the reins these first few weeks, that O-line's so good, even against a good defense. I'm still willing to take risks on him. The problem is, so aren't other people. So I don't know if your advantage is really there, unless it's on FanDuel where there are some decent pay-up options and they're going to take a lot of the, ownership. So that's kind of interesting there. Jacquizz Rodgers against Miami. Care to, talk about this one?
Yeah, and he's more of a name kind of in the middle because, there are going to be some touches there. And I remember last year, him going into San Francisco, and you didn't care. You were not hearing me out one bit because you just were so anti Jacquizz Rodgers. And, this was probably coming off the game, whatever they ran the first 15 times of the game with him. And, when Doug Martin missed those 7 games last year, Rodgers averaged 17 rushing attempts per game and 71 rushing yards. And he's not a big receiving back. That's a disadvantage. Charles Sims will still have some of that role. Miami, 22nd DVOA against the run. It's a decent matchup. And I just don't think people are going to play Rodgers. And I think this game's a big pile of GPP plays, this Miami-Tampa game on both sides.
So I'm going to, excuse myself a little bit here because I kind of somewhat remember that being the period where laxatives were a part of the show. I don't quite remember exactly what the narrative was there, but I remember I took some and I was recording. So, if I was a little ornery, I mean, give me a break here. But no, definitely not a fan of Jacquizz Rodgers, and that's the dynasty leaguer speaking there, but certainly a good matchup. And certainly, I was a big fan of Jeremy McNichols in the draft, and he just couldn't, get things going. It looks like he might even get cut. So that's certainly disheartening for me. And he was really the only guy I could see cutting into a Jacquizz Rodgers workload for these first few weeks. So I think, all systems go on him as sort of a volume play.
Yeah. And, you and I'm a little bummed I can't play Yahoo anymore because I'm in Florida now. But a little plug here. Really good tournaments over there. They do a great job at limiting multi-entry. And I just want to talk about these running back prices on Yahoo.
Sure.
Carlos Hyde, 24. That's nice. Jay Ajayi, $27. That's nice. That's the 10th most expensive running back. That's around guys like Lamar Miller, Leonard Fournette, who I'm not on for week 1. Todd Gurley, Dalvin Cook are both $21 in favorable matchups. Those are really 3 really strong plays that you're getting a really good discount on for week 1 on Yahoo. So if you're over there, I give strong consideration to all 3 of those guys.
And also in terms of Yahoo, the pricing is, obviously you're talking about values, but it's usually pretty sharp and it forces you to, really know your stuff in terms of the cheaper plays. So that's one of the things, I felt like last year we really could have helped you with, and hopefully can help you again this year, was sort of some of the cheaper plays. But let's move on to wide receivers here, maybe talk about some of those values. Wide receiver this week, What are you looking at? Do you like the values here, or is it kind of a mediocre value week?
No, I think there's value here. I think there's some shots to be had. There's Robbie Anderson on DraftKings for 3,800, 52 on FanDuel. Jordy Nelson's only 77 on FanDuel. I think you're getting Rogers Nelson stack. I know it's against Seattle at a severe discount. Larry Fitzgerald's only 64. Cousins, Crowder under 7K on FanDuel, but I think when you look at DraftKings, it's interesting because we kind of always hunt out maybe those one or two deep GPP shots like a Kenny Stills, like the Robbie Andersons, who, it takes one play to get them, on the board. It's 150-yard catch. It's one long 70-yard touchdown for Stills. We've seen it before. So Jay Cutler, say what you will about him. I kind of still like some of these Miami receivers. I know you and I both like Devontae Parker here for week 1. And this is kind of one of the things where, obviously they're going to be a run-first offense, but Color's going to be throwing 50-50 balls. He's going to be slinging that bad boy around, and Parker is going to make some plays.
So Devontae Parker is going to be the guy who emerges this year if he stays healthy. I mean, there's nobody else like him with the athletic profile, with the draft position, with the third year role, with the gunslinger coming in to change sort of his targets and what they're going to look like. He's the guy. And I think a lot of people have realized this, especially in redraft. I've been in 3 leagues so far, and I mean, he's been reached on in every single draft, way above his ADP for redraft. And I'd imagine, he's going to snag some ownership in this week 1, but not enough. Not enough. If he's 15%, that's not enough for me to think, he's like chalk. I don't care. I want him the first few weeks of the season. For better or worse, Cutler's going to be throwing to him. He's already used Alshon Jeffrey as an example of what he looks like. And Parker has the athletic profile to back that up. He has the, unique college production to back that up. He has the draft positions. They picked him, in the mid first round a few years ago. Really his only issues have been injuries and really target share from a quarterback who wasn't good at throwing deep. So he's always shown those highlight plays. I'm in love. I'm in love early on in the season. I think he's going to make everyone a lot of money early on.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I like Parker quite a bit here. And as you said, throughout the first few weeks, getting adjusted on this Miami offense, it's certainly going to be, I think, a good GPP offense to target.
So I want to ask you about a guy here. The Bills obviously traded Sammy Watkins. Not many weapons left there. They did draft who you mentioned here, Zay Jones, in the 2nd round. Tested out better at the combine than I expected him to. So I can respect that. Wasn't a big fan of him heading in. Had to have a change of heart there. Now he's got, potentially a big role in year 1. What are you looking at this matchup against the Jets?
Obviously, Buffalo, I mean, we're kind of looking at them right now. We're in the midst of kind of just asking what the hell are they doing at this point. Obviously, the Watkins trade came out of nowhere. Anquan Bolden realized what was happening and gave his excuse and took a retirement, which I don't blame him. They got Jordan Matthews. I think that's got an interesting play on this season, but Zay Jones, clearly, I think Buffalo has a lot of faith in, and they're going to actually just use. I think he's going to be one of the better first-year wide receivers to actually make a fantasy impact because he's a little bit versatile for me. I mean, I kind of like what I've been seeing out of him. Obviously, I think you go in deeper into that stuff and kind of look at how they test out. You see those angles. Not so much on my end. Maybe that hurts me. Maybe that hurts you, just given the fact that you may be off Zay Jones for the first few weeks and people are on him, and then, all of a sudden. But one, I mean, Tyrod Taylor has to get cleared. I've actually liked what I saw out of Peterman, out of Pittsburgh this year. So far in preseason, they're actually hyping him up. It's always kind of curious to see if maybe Peterman gets a start over Tyrod at some point this year, but that's later down the line. The Jets are going to be bad. As bad as Buffalo, I think, is going to be now moving forward. The Jets are going to be worse. And I think, at home for Buffalo, going up against this Jets team that, I don't even find the defense to be that good anymore. They're carved up through the air last year. These prices are appealing. $12 on Yahoo, $35 on DraftKings, especially the PPR site like DraftKings. If he gets 6 catches for 70 yards, I mean, that's clearly hitting value as a wide receiver 3, and you're spending money elsewhere.
Yeah, and I'm looking dead at that $12 on Yahoo. That's like really nice, a really nice price. I mean, I know Andre Holmes was kind of like people were kind of talking about him having maybe a wide receiver 3 role on that Bills team this year. But I joked around initially about how maybe I didn't like Zay Jones. I thought he was a compiler in college where he didn't really have to do much, but then he tested out really well. And then you kind of look at that system he was in college, and they kind of force feed one guy every year, and that's kind of how they do things. So it was clearly to me, and then he got picked in the second round. So the Bills gave him the check mark, so I'm going to give him the check mark too. So I'm in, especially for those prices, even if I didn't necessarily, like what I saw. I mean, clearly there's something there, so I'm in. And you mentioned another guy here, DeAndre Hopkins. He's in a weird part of his career, and I don't really know where it's headed. I do know he's talented. I kind of hope they figure out that quarterback situation, if not this year, next year. What are you looking at against Jacksonville?
So Jacksonville is an interesting defense because we'll also talk about that in the defensive part of the show. But DeAndre Hopkins, I mean, you look at last year, he was kind of held in check for the most part by Jacksonville. And once again, I don't think it's by anything on his end or matchup end. It's just simply been the quarterback play for really most of Hopkins' career now at this point. And, he saw 30 targets against Jacksonville this last season. He's going to see plenty of targets again, whether it's Savage or Watson under center. And, for week 1, it's looking like Savage, which that doesn't appeal to anyone. It's not going to appeal to a lot of people, and it's going to appeal to me because Hopkins is going to come in lower owned. He's going to be underpriced as he is. He's only 59 on DraftKings. He's 71 on FanDuel, 18 on Yahoo. I mean, below $20 is insane for a caliber wide receiver like Hopkins. So, I expect Jacksonville to be a lot better on the defensive side this year if they can kind of get things managed with their offense, because there's a lot of talent there. They made some moves in the off season. Got some guys that they're going to go up against 2 tough corners here early on. But Hopkins is an intriguing kind of high volume guy that I don't mind taking a shot on, especially given the fact that there's really no other red zone threats. There's no other wide receiver threats that I'm really encouraged with, because I mean, Jalen Strong is their number 2 right now.
Yeah, I liked Will Fuller a lot.
That noise summed it up right
there. Jalen Strong has a nice athletic profile, and then he had that nice college production, and then he fell to the 3rd round, and that's like a blinking red flag when a guy with his profile falls that far. And then you hear nothing from him the first few years. Clearly something's going on off the field that you should kind of be worried about. Braxton Miller hasn't really, I don't trust him in a fantasy sense whatsoever. Will Fuller was the guy. And then obviously collarbone or shoulder or whatever it was. So he's going to be out for a while. I don't love going against Jalen Ramsey, but if he can just get a few plays off of Jalen Ramsey, I mean, yeah, this could definitely, if he was priced where he was last year at the beginning of the year, I wouldn't like him, but 18 on Yahoo, I'm in. That's a great tournament play in my opinion. Yeah. All right. So I'm not even going to say let's talk tight ends. Let's talk Austin Hooper for a second, because he's a guy who I liked out of Stanford. Kind of snuck around on the Falcons last year while everyone else was doing their thing, but he kind of did some good stuff. And he was playing some snaps, but it was a rookie year and they were really competitive. So they didn't want to, they didn't overexpose him. But this year, especially if you see some regression coming from this, Falcons D or just, a regression from what was one of the most efficient seasons of all time for an offense. So, I mean, if you kind of see Taylor Gabriel going by the wayside, maybe Mohamed Sanu, getting a few less targets. That's where Austin Hooper pops in and gets, that 500-600 receiving yards this year. And in matchups like this, for like, as cheap as he is, I mean, you mentioned it here. Why not take a stab for, $3K on DraftKings against Chicago?
And so, I mean, obviously, you're talking about Hooper, and you expect obviously a much bigger bump from him this season. I'm with you, and I think, beyond it here early, he might garnish a lot of talk from the industry to the point where his ownership does pop up a little bit. But tight ends in Atlanta, I mean, I said it here, it has not been relevant since Tony Gonzalez was there. It just, there's a lot of weapons still on this team. You obviously have Julio Jones, who's the number one. You talked to Sanu, you talked Taylor Gabriel, and then obviously you have the two running backs still. So, getting inside the red zone, it's still going to be a toss-up. It's always kind of frustrating because those red zone touchdowns have always been basically Coleman and Freeman over the last 2 seasons now, and it's been a little bit frustrating for guys, of Julio Jones, any other, secondary receivers. You're not kind of getting those looks in the red zone. I think this year could be a little bit different. I could see Jones getting the more red zone looks. I think they've already talked about that happening. I think Hooper's an intriguing option here. And at this price tag, on 3K, Zach Ertz is $500 more. Ertz is going to be a popular tight end play on DraftKings this week. But FanDuel, I mean, if you want to punt the position entirely, I think 4,700 is interesting because I don't think it's out of the question to see Hooper and go, you know what, 3 for 40 and a touchdown. I don't think it's crazy.
Exactly. And, if his price gets higher, I'm not going to like him. But he's kind of in that CJ Fedorowicz range. That's the type of player I see him being this
Jack
year.
Doyle from last year when he was,
right.
number one tight end there.
All right, well, let's settle down.
No, when Dwayne Allen was banged up, not number one tight end.
No, I know what you mean. But yeah, like Jack Doyle, he'll be usable. He'll have usable weeks, and he'll let you fit in those high-end guys you want, and he won't kill you. So that's kind of what I see from Hooper this year. So let's start it off, and as you mentioned, Zach Ertz against Washington. Obviously, Jordan Matthews gone, so that slot kind of opened up a little bit. Ertz was obviously a target hog at the end of last year. What do you see there?
Ertz, 59 on FanDuel, it's a little bit steep for me. I don't think it's a bad price. I still think the upside can be there because we did see it at times last year. And I could definitely see maybe this game kind of turning into a little bit of a shootout just between the passing attacks because I'm actually really curious to see how Philly runs the ball this year. I didn't like what I've seen out of preseason. I'm not putting a ton of stock into it, but Garrett Blount just doesn't look like the guy from last year. I wasn't expecting the guy from last year because anyone in that system is going to run the ball well, but I don't know, man. I mean, were you high on Ertz, before Jordan Matthews left, or is he kind of taking a tick up for you?
So I was buying Ertz this offseason in dynasty leagues, which is something I shouldn't be talking about on a DFS pod. But, I think it's kind of relevant in terms of Carson Wentz and what you think of him. I kind of like him. I mean, he's gotten consistently bashed this offseason, and I felt like for a rookie year, he did fine. Obviously, he got, he regressed as the year went on and things kind of fell off, but what do you want from a rookie, So I thought he looked pretty good. I think he has good weapons this year. I do not think he's going to be the top option, but, you look at Alshon Jeffrey, that's 120 targets. What about the rest of the passing game? Nelson Aguilar, I like. He's okay, but he's not going to get 100 targets this year. And then you look at Torrey Smith. I mean, he's not going to get 100 targets this year. So where are these targets going to go? And especially for a possession guy that Wentz can trust, I just think it's Ertz. So I don't know, especially early on at these prices. I'm in, sure. 59, that's kind of – that's about where I think he should be priced, so I don't like it as much. But I don't know.
When you look at FanDuel, I mean, Jimmy Graham is $300 more. I really like Jimmy Graham this week. Delaney Walker's there, a couple hundred more who I think are more prominent kind of threats in that offense. And just in terms of getting touchdowns, Ertz really hasn't been that touchdown guy in his career yet. I don't know if he'll get that way. Martellus Bennett's going to be an interesting play in Green Bay at 5,700. So it's a little bit different between FanDuel and DraftKings. I think you obviously can make the logical case of just fade Ertz on FanDuel if you want to go that route or use him. DraftKings, once again, I think, if you want to go around with those cheap wide receivers, cheap running backs, you can have the extra cash to pay up for a Jimmy Graham, who I think that Seattle Green Bay game has a lot of potential to produce a fair amount of fantasy points.
He's also much more of a DraftKings type player.
Yeah. Yeah,
He's
his 6
essentially
for 60.
yeah. He's essentially the Jamison Crowder of tight ends, where he's never going to score a lot of touchdowns, but and I don't know how many touchdowns Jamison Crowder's caught. I just threw that out there because
It hasn't been many. It was 4 last year.
Yeah, well, I should have said Jarvis Landry, but I like Jarvis Landry. So anyway, Zach Ertz, good play on DK. Don't love it on FanDuel. All right, defenses. You don't have my favorite defense in here, which I'm upset about. Can you guess who it is?
Is it a top defense?
I'm going to be playing them every single week this year. It's not one defense. It's all the defenses that play the Jets. I'm just
let's not, Houston's obviously in play, Buffalo's obviously in play, Pittsburgh, Atlanta,
Buffalo. Yeah. Buffalo versus the Jets, man. And Buffalo's not a good D, but I just said
it will be this week.
A few months ago, it's just like I'm just going all in. That's going to be profitable throughout the year. Just play whoever's playing the Jets. You mentioned some more interesting plays here. Rams versus Colts. Obviously, you're planning on Luck not playing. What are you looking at there?
That's exactly it. Going on the road, Los Angeles has been kind of a tough place for people to play, even people within the division last year. We just kind of saw people go there and struggle, and I see that kind of happening again. Indy, they're missing their starting center. Ryan Kelly's going to be out. That's a huge loss for an already very pedestrian offensive line. I think that's being generous. Andrew Luck doubtful for week 1. After that, Hilton's not one of those guys to go out there and kind of dominate a game. I love T.Y. Hilton, but he's not that. Dante Moncrief really isn't either. Frank Gore, I don't see them putting up a ton of runs. I'm still in baseball format, but a ton of points. Scott Tolzien starting at quarterback. This team's in trouble, and the Rams offer a small discount. Only $3,200 on DK. I expect them to be popular. The Gurley Rams defense stack should be something that people, dive into this week. And I don't blame them. And, like you said, Buffalo's going to be in play. Houston's going to be in play. I'm not terribly worried about ownerships in terms of defenses. I picked the best one.
So when you mentioned the Jags here, is this that weird type of week where you could play Hopkins and Jags D and still profit off of it? Could it be that weird week where they get a pick 6 or 2 and then, Hopkins still gets 100 receiving yards?
It very well could be. They could score 13 points, 1 touchdown from Hopkins and 2 field goals.
Yeah. That's kind of what you're looking at there. Is there something about that matchup you like?
Yeah, I'm also curious to see if that game stays in Houston. Just given the fact of the troubles of the city throughout the last week, that would be something if it did get moved. Jacksonville's defense is underrated. They were properly rated last year and then got just bortled because he's turned the ball over a ton of times. How many pick sixes did Blake Bortles throw last year? A few, and tons of 3-and-outs. This Jacksonville defense, added Calais Campbell, added AJ Bouye. Those are prominent defensive moves to an already really young and talented defense. And going up against Tom Savage, going up against, like we said, Hopkins is really the only threat. And if they can funnel everything down to him and kind of focus on him, there is that downside to him. And then Lamar Miller, it's not a good Houston offense. And I kind of noticed, so DraftKings priced up Jacksonville quite a bit. They're the 3rd most expensive at $3,700. Mm-hmm. They're bottom 5 in pricing on FanDuel. So I'm curious to see if DK's algorithm picked up on something there for Jacksonville, while FanDuel and Yahoo are just going off based on last year, which it looks like. And if you want to punt defense with Jacksonville at 41 or 12 on Yahoo, I think it's an interesting GPP move that no one's going to really do.
Good take, Jason. I like that. Is there anything else you want to throw out there before we head out?
No, as usual, this article is, it's early in the week. Obviously, we're doing it a week before even the first week. we take things into consideration in terms of pricing. We're not saying play these guys, they're must plays or anything like that. Also, we're just kind of talking about some interesting situations and definitely take chances. Once again, we're going off based on last year. We're going off stuff from preseason. There's a lot of volatility within the first few weeks. Embrace it.
Other than Devontae Parker, he's a must play. And if you don't play him, you're going to lose money. Like, you're going to lose all your money because you're a little loser. Don't play Devontae Parker. Idiots. Anyway, it's fun to be back. I felt like we're back in the saddle again, like that song. I would have played it, but I still don't know how to work, like setting up the sound and having it play through, my mic, or I'd play back in the saddle again. But
we also need to plug. We're going to be doing a game-by-game breakdown midweek at some point here soon. So yeah, Russ and I we're going to make it even longer than this one.
Yes. A little egregious on the time this week, but whatever, that's fine.
It's week 1. We're excited.
So we're going to see you guys next week, and good luck. And, let's hang out, bros. And maybe
the sign off was not as good as the intro.
This was bad. This is bad. Let's just end it here because I'm embarrassed.
Yeah, I'll take over here. Why don't you head on over to dailyfantasycafe.com, check out our great tools and content.